We will
Hi.
start just live. Okay.
Okay.
Welcome,
Can you hear me?
welcome everyone to this webinar, which will be addressing the escalating humanitarian crisis in Rafah. And as Israeli forces continue the intensified attack on the last sanctuary for displaced Palestinians, the atrocities being committed affect innocent lives. We are joined by an incredible panel today of speakers who will discuss the urgent need for action in the face of ongoing violence and potentially strategies to mitigate this catastrophe and prevent further catastrophe. With that, I would like to invite Dr. Ahmed Al-Sayed, who is an Egyptian doctor who is in Gaza and will be speaking with us. Dr. Al-Sayed.
Thank you very much for asking me to be here with you. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to return back some of the horrors that are being and continuing to be made on civilians in Gaza. I spent a couple of weeks in the European hospital in Khan Yunis, which is just 2 kilometers away from Nasser Hospital. Bombs were continuously heard overnight. Continuous sounds of drones over your head, which have face recognition. You're always being observed. Daily massacres. 100% of the civilians that I saw and the rest of my team, who are 21 and are the largest delegation since they entered, they allowed medical delegations to enter Gaza, have been civilians. Not a single casualty we treated was a military man. We're talking about casualties ranging from wounds in the chest reaching the heart. We're talking about limbs amputated, sometimes auto-amputated by the rockets themselves, or devascularized and denerved by the rockets or bullets. We're talking about quadriplegic 10-year-old Ghazal. We're talking about a bullet going through the spine. We're talking about targeted bullets to the torso. These are bullets aimed to hit, to kill, not to scare. We are talking about a 3-year-old child with a bullet from top to bottom. We are talking about a 30-year-old lady with a bullet going through, crossing across. We're talking about young men that used to feed people on the streets with bullets going full thickness from front to back, shattered chest walls, and a 13-year-old child. We're talking about very, very targeted and with intention to kill civilians. It doesn't make a difference if you're a child, if you're a woman, if you're a man, a civilian. It doesn't make any difference. We're talking about someone with his lower half completely burnt. It is the stories go on. The stories go on, and the images are available for those who would like to see.
Thank you so much, Dr. Al-Sayed. That was very sobering. I would like to invite Miko Peled, who is an activist and author, to speak, if he's here. I think Mr. Peled might not be here. So if he joins us later, we can move on to Bill Law, who is the editor of Arab Digest and former MENA analyst for the BBC. Mr. Law.
Hello, thank you. I don't know whether you can see me. I can't seem to sort out my picture, so if not, my apologies.
We can't see you. Just one moment. We can see you.
You can see me? Okay, fine.
No, we can. Just turn off your camera and open it back, please.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I managed to do something with my Zoom, and I can't figure out how to open up my camera again. So I think we just have to listen to my audio and
Okay.
Ignore the absence of my face. First of all, thank you to AOHR for this opportunity, and thank you to Dr. Saeed, a very powerful and very disturbing situation. His courage and the great courage of all the people, all the Palestinians in this awful situation need to be acknowledged, and we need to support as best we can. So I thank AOHR for giving me the opportunity in a small way to show my support. it does seem to me that there will be a reckoning once this awful war has ended. There will be a reckoning for Washington, for its unqualified support for the Israeli genocide here in London, where I'm speaking to you from. There will be a reckoning. There will be a reckoning in the global north, I think, because of the hypocrisy that we have seen, that atrocities committed by Putin were immediately decried and condemned. Atrocities committed by the IDF are ignored and indeed oftentimes encouraged. Of course, Netanyahu will face a reckoning, and I do think that there will be questions about the decisions that Hamas made. The targeting of civilians, in particular, gave Netanyahu a certain degree of cover. All of these things will need to be examined once the war is over, and of course, the ICJ will need to pursue a very important case against the Israelis, and that will be watched, I think, by the world very, very closely. I did, if I might, though, focus my comments this afternoon on the leaders of the Arab states, not the people. I want to make that distinction very clear. The people in the Arab states have universally supported and backed the Palestinians. The leadership, with the exception of Qatar, I have to say, has been very, very disappointing. Powerful Arab states, such as Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, I think of those two in particular, Egypt, to a certain extent, they have taken positions that really have facilitated and made rather easy the objectives of the Netanyahu regime to carry out this genocide. I think that had there been a stronger response from the leaders of these countries, for example, if the UAE had withdrawn its ambassador, as Turkey did, as Jordan did, if the Bahrainis had followed suit, if the Saudis have not been so concerned about normalization that they have really soft-pedaled, had there been more strong condemnation from very early on of the attacks that the Israelis, the IDF, were carrying out, had there been a decision to withdraw ambassadors, for example, had there been a decision to use the powerful economic clout that these states, particularly the Saudis and the Emiratis, have against Israel, then we may not be where we are today. And I do think that Qatar has played a very important role. But the Qatar Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary at the Munich Security Conference asked the question, which has not been answered. If we do not help, and he meant by that the Arab states, if we do not help the citizens of Palestine and of Gaza, what will we say to our citizens when this war ended? So I do think that whilst we focus on the hypocrisies, the strategic decisions by Washington, by London, we need also to look at what the Arab states can do still, and the kind of impact they could still have to force Netanyahu and this, frankly, fascist regime that is in power, to force them to back down. It's very, very disheartening, discouraging that so little strong denunciation, very clear statements of economic and diplomatic impact are not being made. Threats, if you will, to Netanyahu, to the Israelis, that there are consequences for these horrible actions that they're carrying out in Gaza and in the West Bank. We mustn't forget the West Bank as well, where more than 300 people have been killed by the IDF and by settler vigilantes armed by Ben-Gvir, the national security minister. So I will leave it there. And as I say, I do want to make the distinction, though, between the leaders of most of the Arab states and the people. The people of the Arab states clearly support and back the Palestinians. It's their leadership that has questions, that will have questions to answer when this awful war finally ends. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So with that, for that insightful contribution, I would now like to move on next to Mr. Patson Melissa, who is a diplomat and development executive. So.
Thank you very much, Madam Program Director, colleagues and friends. Once again, thank you to the convener for finding it fit that I add my voice and insight into the events unfolding currently in Rafah, as well as the Gaza territory as a whole, in relation to the onslaught of the civilian population of Palestine. It is essential that I assert that every attack strategy that is employed towards civilian communities, their habitats, essentials, facilities, refuge assembly points, and the disconnection of humanitarian relief is to be condemned without qualification. And every state and ethnic community has the right to exist without fear of military disruption to their way of life and pursuit of a meaning under the sun. It is therefore prudent that all who observe the solemn value of humanity call for all ceasing of hostilities between Israel and Palestine, and further reiterate the need for civilian protection and relief in the transition towards a settlement of peace. An important component of identification of the threat of genocide, of which was emphasized in the application set by the Republic of South Africa versus the State of Israel at the International Court of Justice, is the reduction of the franchise and humanity of a people. This is expressed in the rhetoric by the leadership of attacking parties, wherein the victim's humanity and value of existence is diminished. In this strategy, the people are likened unto animals or disposable casualties, as was the case in the Rwandan experience of 1994, where the Tutsis were likened unto cockroaches whose extermination was a matter of sanitation and not murder. This made the speedy and mass murder executed against this minority population to appear as a service of patriotism and not for the criminal act that it was. The same can be applied to the Palestinian case. In this situation, the life and franchise of the Palestinian civilian has been reduced in value and weighed against the military objective of one state against its neighbor territory as irrelevant. This has led to the unsettling assumption by some that the evacuation and uprooting of civilians from a lifetime of work, dreams, and accomplishment into a state of indigence and helplessness is trumped by the military objective of attacking and neutralizing a military enemy. If we are indeed to effectively advocate for the cessation of any further civilian casualties on both fronts, it is essential that all willing members of society bring to life the value of the Palestinian civilian. This requires that we reassert that the people of Palestine are entitled to an official standing in the world with the freedoms of expression, movement, and settlement. It is paramount that we reiterate the value of a stable and peaceful Palestine and what it can add to the dynamics of the region and inevitably the world. In doing so, we isolate the true instigators of conflict in this affair, where when carefully examined, one can see that fundamentalism and nationalist extremism is at the forefront of the conflict that has brought the existence of a people to such peril. These fundamentalists are unfortunately in a place of authority, and thus what they say appears to be national policy, and the use of their state machinery makes the fundamentalism to appear to be a national military strategy. It is, however, important that the political economy of the Israeli-Palestinian relation be evaluated for its authentic empirical value, and not only the imaginations of those who'd have both states burn, rather than they jointly be partners in the effort to stabilize the Middle East. It is my duty, therefore, in this address to call for and urge all well-meaning nations and non-state actors to isolate extremism and its perpetrators for what they truly are, war criminals. An urgent of this lobbying is the plight of the refugees camped in Rafah, as they have been displaced more times than is acceptable, as even one time is already one time too much. There is more value and benefit in the peaceful relations and coexistence of Israel and Palestine than there is in perpetual conflict. All members of leadership in the world, whatever our ideologies, have to acknowledge and assert the value of a stable Palestine. And this cannot be achieved when civilians are living under the cloud of uncertainty, constant displacement, and worst of all, threat of extermination. In closing, I leave you with the words of the father of my nation, the late great Nelson Mandela, who said the following concerning Palestine. The temptation in our situation is to speak in muffled tones about an issue such as the right of the people of Palestine. We can easily be enticed to read reconciliation and fairness as meaning parity between justice and injustice. Having achieved our own freedom, we can fall into the trap of washing our hands of difficulties of others. Yet, we would be less than human if we were to do so. It behoves on South Africans themselves, erstwhile beneficiaries of generous international support, to stand up and be counted among those contributing actively to the cause of freedom and justice. Now, close quote. These words ring true today and apply to us all. I thank you.
Thank you so much for your inspiring and well-articulated words. I would like to invite our member of the Irish Parliament, Richard Boyd Barrett, to please speak next.
Thanks, Insigne, and thanks for the invite to contribute to this discussion today. First of all, I think we need to say that the thought that Israel wants to launch yet another massacre in Rafah after more than 4 months of a genocidal assault on the people of Gaza that has left 30,000, mostly women and children, dead, that has displaced 2 million people, and that has brought the entire population of Gaza to the brink of famine, demonstrates that this is a regime that is completely out of control and that has no place in the civilized world. I think it demonstrates that this has nothing to do, and never did have anything to do, with so-called self-defense, but that Israel has used the October the 7th events as a pretext to accelerate and intensify a long-standing agenda of genocidal destruction of Palestinian society and of the idea of the Palestinian nation. So I think it's important we emphasize that and we reject completely the notion that the current horrific escalation of violence dates to October the 7th, but in fact is part of an ongoing campaign of ethnic cleansing that began in 1948 and that has seen decades, wave after wave, for decades of ethnic cleansing, of murderous occupation, of cruel and brutal apartheid, and of course of the 16-year-long siege of Gaza, which in and of itself was a crime against humanity. And I think we need to hold deeply complicit the regimes in the Western world and elsewhere, but in particular in the Western world, that have facilitated and supported Israel in its genocidal campaign against the Palestinian people. Quite simply, without US weapons and arms, British weapons and arms, German weapons and arms, the favored trade status that the European Union confers on Israel, they would not be able to carry on this genocide. And indeed, if the Western world had have imposed sanctions on this apartheid colonial regime when the Palestinian people were pleading with them to do so for many, many years before now, when international human rights organizations had pleaded again and again for the world to act against the war crimes and crimes of humanity that Israel was committing, we would not be facing this horrific situation. It is the impunity that Israel has been given and the refusal of the world to recognize that Israel is not a normal state, but is a state that is built on apartheid, colonialism, and ongoing crimes against the Palestinian people. So I think that is important, because as horrific as this situation currently is for the Palestinian people, I do also think that Israel and its backers have been exposed, and in particular because of the sharp contrast in the standards and so-called standards of the Western world, which were revealed with their immediate move to sanction Putin, rightly, for his cruel and brutal and unjustifiable invasion of Ukraine, but then the absolute failure to do anything to stop Israel's genocidal assault on Gaza has exposed in front of the eyes of the world these absolutely outrageous double standards, and demonstrated the complicity of the Western powers with the crimes that Israel is committing on an ongoing basis against the Palestinian people. But I think the key to force our governments to do more, to break their links with this colonialist and apartheid regime, is the movement of people on the streets that we are seeing. Here in Ireland, there has been constant mass mobilization since the commencement of Israel's assault. And I have to say, it has put massive pressure on the Irish government. In the first few weeks of Israel's assault, the Irish government were essentially echoing the talking points of Israel and its Western backers in justifying the so-called self-defense argument. But we've seen that Ireland, because of the huge extent of mobilization, the Irish government were then forced to call for a ceasefire. And now, more recently, they are at least beginning to articulate the demands of the mass movement on the streets that is demanding serious sanctions. So, for example, the Irish government in the last week has written to Ursula von der Leyen saying that the EU-Mediterranean Association Agreement, which Europe has with Israel, should be reviewed. The Irish Foreign Minister has called Israel a rogue state. They are seriously talking about sanctions. Now, they're not doing it, but it shows that they're under massive pressure. And a huge issue that is now emerging in Ireland is that Ireland's national day, St. Patrick's Day on March the 17th, is a day when the Irish Prime Minister goes to Washington traditionally to give presents to the US president. And a massive debate has developed in Irish society saying that no Irish politician, no Irish Prime Minister, government representative should be seen shaking hands with or in any way fraternizing with a president like Biden, who has armed and supported and is deeply complicit with the Israeli genocide in Gaza. So again, we are mobilizing people on the streets around those demands, and the government is under very, very serious pressure. Last point I would make is, at the big demonstration at the weekend, one of the people that we put on the platform was one of the workers in a shops called Dunn Stores, which is a retail supermarket network, who went on strike in the mid-1980s for 2 years because they refused to handle South African goods. And this forced the Irish government in the 1980s to be the first international government to impose wholesale sanctions on apartheid South Africa. And it began a domino effect internationally of imposing sanctions on apartheid South Africa. So we think that is a good example of how people power can force governments to finally recognize the apartheid colonialist nature of the Israeli regime, and to replicate what was done with apartheid South Africa, to dismantle that regime and to make way for a free Palestine where Muslim, Jewish people, Christian, and people of no religion can live as equals when they are freed of the apartheid colonialist regime that is the root cause of the violence and conflict that we're witnessing in Gaza and for decades in Palestine.
Thank you so much for your solidarity and continued support and all the work that you do to stand in solidarity with the Palestinian cause. I would now like to invite Professor David Miller, who is a British academic and sociologist, to address us next.
We can't hear you.
Yes. My apologies.
Okay.
Thank
you very much for inviting me and for your kind comments about my case, which of course came to a conclusion some 12 days ago, where I was declared to have been wrongfully dismissed, and indeed to have been dismissed because of my anti-Zionist views, which henceforth in British law are protected under the Equality Act. So that's a principle which is there for everyone in the UK to defend themselves should they be attacked by their employer for their anti-Zionism or their pro-Palestinian activities. I guess the thing I would say, look, in adding to the already extraordinary comments of the various people who've spoken about the situation in Gaza and Palestine, and of course the terrible collaboration that there is with the genocide by Western governments and indeed by Arab states too. I mean, the thing I would want to talk about and focus on is some of the research that I've been doing for a show which I produce and I'm the resident expert on, called Palestine Declassified, TV show you can see every week on Press TV. And in particular, I'd want to focus on not just the complicity of the UK and the US government in particular, which we know about, and of course the spy flights that the British have been sending over Gaza, the Israeli military who are being currently trained in the UK. Of course, the US complicity is much, much greater than that as well. But also I would like to point to the complicity of the Zionist movement more generally, and I mean in particular the Zionist movement outside occupied Palestine. The Zionist movement, as some of us will know, is organized in such a way that it has a structured presence in around 35 nations around the world, including significant presence in the UK and of course in the US. The biggest Zionist movement outside Israel is in the US. And some of the things we've been doing recently on the show have involved examining the way in which there are charities operating, yes, in the US, but also in the UK, which are sending money directly to the IDF. So there are, for example, there's one called Beit Halochem, and there's another one called the UK Friends of the Association for the Wellbeing of Israel Soldiers. And they are sending significant sums of cash every year to build, for example, swimming pools in the Nakab Desert, which the Zionists call the Negev. So at the same time as there are children in Gaza who have got no water to drink, there are members of the so-called Israeli Defense Forces sunning themselves and swimming in a swimming pool, which has been donated by British Zionists. And now they do this under the charity legislation of the UK, where a charity is supposed to show public benefit, which means that it should be doing good, and that if it does any harm, that the good should outweigh the harm. The Charity Commission is still investigating this particular charity, that's the UK AWIS, the Association for the Wellbeing of Israel Soldiers. But it seems to me quite clear that that calculation is way off the scale in terms of harms which are being caused by this particular charity. Now, this charity, of course, is funded by a range of other charities in the UK. One of the things we've been doing is looking at the different charities involved in the research we've done has come up with something like 30 or 35 different charities involved in directly funding this charity, which then funds the IDF. I would give you just some examples, since we've not got a lot of time. One of the examples refers to a family called the Levy family, who have been funding this charity quite significantly, have appeared in occupied Palestine at the openings of mobile synagogues or leisure areas, which their money is paid for. And they've paid for this in the name of their children. One of their children, Avi, at the age of 18, joined the Israel Defense Forces. This is a British citizen who currently is participating, it would seem, in the genocide in Gaza. Now, there are many, many more British citizens doing that, as there are US, Brazilian, South African, and other citizens, possibly even Irish citizens. Richard, I look at you in relation to that. And this is a real issue which we need to deal with. And there certainly are cases in South Africa, in Belgium, and nascent cases in the UK to deal with that. That's one example. The other examples I wanted to give you are of quite prominent Zionist families. So the most prominent one, I guess, is the Wolfson family. awarded the last hereditary peerage in the UK in 1962. The son of the person who got that hereditary peerage, David Wolfson, became a lord, of course, and was Margaret Thatcher's director of policy in the mid-1980s. They currently are involved in, they run the retail chain Next PLC, which is on every high street in the UK. That's a family which has been engaged over multiple years in sending tens of thousands and millions of pounds actually to the occupation of Palestine, at the same time as being better known for their philanthropy. Wolfson College, Cambridge is named after them. Wolfson College, Oxford is named after them. But nevertheless, they have been engaged over multi-generations in effectively funding genocide in Palestine, and this has got to stop. Another example I would give you, and I'll stop at the end of this example, is the example of Rontech, a company which no one will ever have heard of, which runs 256 service stations, SO and BP service stations, up and down the length of England and Wales, for some reason not in Scotland. And this is run by a guy called Gerald Ronson, who, of course, is the convicted Guinness fraudster, who also runs an organization called the Community Security Trust, one of the key organizations involved in the witch hunt against Jeremy Corbyn. And of course, in my own case, was the organization which first took a complaint against me in 2019. Its most recent report on anti-Semitism, on the skyrocketing anti-Semitism happening in the UK, was issued just the other day. And of course, amongst the statistics on anti-Semitism, it includes multiple instances of people chanting "Free Palestine," as if that had anything to do with racism against the Jews. So you can see that in this process, there is I would say, there's a network of Zionist organizations in each country where there is an organized presence of the Zionist movement, and it's engaged on a daily basis in trying to support genocide in Palestine. And that ought to be part of the target of the Palestine Solidarity Movement, in addition to focusing directly on occupied Palestine.
Thank you so much, Professor Miller. Thank you for sharing your experiences with us. And it would be great if you could also share the link to the resources. That would be really quite useful to disseminate as well. It would be great if we could have a comment or a message about the escalation in Rafah, which is the last refuge for the Palestinian people, with the remaining speakers and for the speakers who have already spoken to comment after. It would be really great to reflect on that as well. And I would like to invite Edward Ahmed Mitchell, the National Deputy Executive Director of CARE, to speak next.
Thank you so much. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu wassalam. I want to thank the Arab Organization for Human Rights in the UK for inviting us to speak. It's a pleasure to be with you, even in these difficult circumstances. So again, I'm Edward Ahmed Mitchell. I'm the Deputy Director of CARE. That's the Council on American Islamic Relations, our nation's largest Muslim civil rights and advocacy organization. Our main focus is obviously fighting anti-Muslim bigotry and discrimination in the United States, but we also try to advocate for causes of justice, especially causes that impact the Muslim community around the world. That includes, obviously, Palestine. Long before the recent outbreak of violence and the genocide, we've been warning the Biden administration that their policy on Israel and Palestine was doomed to failure, that these attempts to try to form a new arms deal or a normalization deal, whatever you want to call it, with more Arab governments without securing a Palestinian state would not bring peace to the region, would just lead to more conflict. And we've been proven right about that over the past 4 months, but it's been worse than even we thought it would be. Our focus over the past 4 months since October 7th has been two things. One, to end the genocide, to stop the war on the people of Palestine. And number two is to stop the war on Palestinian Americans and Muslims here in the United States. And what I mean by that is the following, that we all know about the war that is happening, targeting cities across Gaza, the ethnic cleansing, the genocide. But here in America, there's been a very concerted effort by young people, by Muslims, Jews, Christians, progressives, to speak up against what is happening, to demand a ceasefire, demand an end to U.S. support for the genocide. And that outspokenness has been met with an unprecedented campaign of bigotry, of hate, of censorship, of discrimination, to silence voices who advocate for Palestinian human rights. So we have had our hands full dealing with those two things. One, lobbying for a ceasefire, at the same time having to go to court, go to the media, to protest, to fight for an end to this attempt to suppress Palestinian, pro-Palestine speech here in the United States. The efforts that we put forward, that young people, that activists of all backgrounds put forward, has had some impact. We are seeing many more members of Congress now calling for a ceasefire than we were at the beginning. We have seen a federal court in our country acknowledge that there appears to be a genocide happening in Palestine. And we have seen the Biden administration soften its rhetoric about what is happening, but they have not changed their policy one iota. They are protecting Israel from any consequences at the United Nations. They are insisting on sending billions of dollars more in American taxpayer dollars to the Netanyahu government without any real conditions on that aid. And they have not a single time condemned anything the Israeli government has done in Gaza. Not one condemnation, nothing at all. They have spent their time condemning American activists who speak up for Palestinian human rights and focusing a bit on the West Bank. They'll throw you a bone and criticize some of the settler violence, but even then they don't condemn the Israeli government. Now, where are we right now? I am confident, we are confident that this violence is going to come to an end. We think the political pressure on the president is reaching a breaking point. But we don't want to see all of Gaza destroyed before we get to the point that this violence comes to an end. And right now, the Israeli government is threatening to do to Rafah what they've done to the rest of Gaza, and that is to commit genocide and finish the job and force the Palestinian people off their land completely. We cannot allow that to happen. And even President Biden has, in his very restrained way, tried to discourage the Israelis from doing that. But again, it takes concrete action. And Benjamin Netanyahu does not care about mild private criticism. It's going to take a sea change in American policy, including conditioning aid to the Israeli government, stopping sending them weapons. Only the threat of that is going to stop him. Are we going to get there? I'll tell you, in America, we are trying our best. We are lobbying, we are protesting, we are suing, and we are hopeful that, God willing, this is going to come to an end, but it's a question of when. Last thing I want to say, a positive silver lining, is that if you look at polls of the American people, most Americans support a ceasefire in one way, shape, or form. Most Americans do not want to see their taxpayer dollars sent to support this genocide. That's the vast majority of Democrats. It's a large number of Republicans and many independents. And among young people in particular, views on Israel and Palestine are radically different than the older generation. And so you give it time, American policy will eventually change, because the American people, as they grow older, as young people take over, are going to change our policies. But we don't want to wait 10 years or 20 years, because it may be way too late by then. We have a genocide happening right now. We have occupation right now. We have ethnic cleansing right now. And so at CARE, we're doing everything right now we can to protect the right of Americans, to advocate for an end to this madness, and also to pressure our government to stop this madness. Because without the United States, the genocide could not continue. And that's why we're not going to give up, God willing. And we're happy to work with organizations across the world to end this violence once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for highlighting the actions and, of course, for lobbying for change in the US, which is quite needed. I would now like to invite Dr. Cengiz Tomar, who is a professor of political science and international relations, and will be speaking.
Hello from Istanbul. Thank you very much for having me, for the contribution. I'm a professor on the Middle East, actually observing the Middle East or Palestinian issue more than 25 years. I think now this is the worst situation right now in maybe in 30 years or 50 years in Palestine, especially situation in Rafah right now. I talked to today some aid workers and some Turkish Red Crescent authorities about the situation in Rafah. Actually very, very dangerous, they said. Maybe more than 1.5 million people are struck at the border with Rafah, and no exit to Egypt or Sinai, and situation is very dangerous already. And today also Israeli government threatened in Ramadan, they will, attack again in Rafah city if the Hamas does not free the Israelis. And I think this is very important for us to keep supporting innocent civilians. We should ask for immediate ceasefire. Maybe we should oppress the governments, especially US and United Kingdom, Qatar and Turkey governments. They are doing their best, but the situation in the Middle East in general is in a mess. The Syria, Iraq, and Libya, Yemen, and other countries, and also some Arab governments, Arab people really, they try to do their best, but some Arab governments also maybe they are not very effective to help Gaza and Rafah people. Actually, maybe we are waiting something from International Court of Justice, and Turkey and some other countries. They already sent all the evidences to International Court of Justice, but never mind, Israel does not listen to anybody except for US. And also we have to observe the hypocrisy or double standards of Western governments. And they do some sanctions to Russia for invading or occupation in Ukraine, and also for Iran, but there is no any precaution against Israelis for genocide since more than four months. Maybe up to now, 30,000 innocent people died, and military campaign is already massive, and displacement, destruction, and shortages of food, water, and shelter, and just Rafah city, without that they are waiting their fate. I don't know what can we do. We are in Turkey as academicians or NGOs, Red Crescents, and we are doing our best, and every day some charities and some meetings and programs and everything we are doing. And also the president of Red Crescent, my friend, and I talked to him today. He said that we are ready for help, but sometimes we have some problems to send help to Rafah people or Gaza people. This is very important now. Turkey try to make relations with Egypt and better political relations. That that in 10 years our relation with Egypt was not good. Now it may help to send some aid via Egypt, and also some injuries, more than 700 injuries in Turkey hospitals right now. Okay, this help issue is going very well, but people around the world, in Western world and Eastern world, they are doing their best. But the most important problem is that the Western governments, especially United States, as long as we do not pressurize United States, as long as they back Israelis, the genocide will go on. Israel tried to send all the Gaza or Gaza people or for Rafah people to send them to Sinai, and then Egypt right to to not to accept them because of the Israeli policy is to empty Gaza region and to make it another Palestinian free land for them. I don't know what can we do. Actually, as people, we are doing our best, but should more pressure on United States, and also some sanctions. And also in Turkey, we are boycotting the companies help Israelis, and this is very important and is very successful right now in Turkey, but I don't know whether in the world is effective or not. Up to now, this is our ideas. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Professor. Our final speaker today will be Abid Ayoub, who is the Executive Director of the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, or ADC.
Thank you, and thank you for having me on and for covering this. And I appreciate the opportunity to present and to close it out for you all. And I want to thank the participants for their comments and insight. Very important to hear globally, about what's happening in the situation in Gaza, situation in Palestine, one that's dire, one that requires, needs all our attention and all our efforts at this critical moment. ADC, similar to CARE, but on the and my colleague Edward Mitchell, but we're on the Arab side. So ADC is the largest Arab American grassroots civil rights organization. We've been around for over 40 years in Washington, D.C. And, Palestinians, the Palestinian issue has always been a core of ADC's mission and of our work here in the U.S. And what's happening, what's been happening since October is really, we've allocated a lot of resources and a lot more effort than we have in the past. And that's because of the severity of what's happening. And we look at what's happening in Rafah today, and the direness of that situation and what could happen and what they're working towards is one that's alarming, that's frightening, and that requires our attention. At the same time, you're seeing bombs being dropped on Lebanon this morning, and you're seeing an escalation across the region. So we are in a very peculiar moment where this, as we've been saying all along for months, and as other experts have said, this could expand into a more regional war, more regional effort. I think we're already there. With bombs falling in different countries, and in Lebanon, particularly again this morning, with the situation of the Rafah border escalating. These are dangerous times ahead. And, as one of the speakers mentioned, the focus is, what is the U.S. going to do? They are the key players in this. From our community's perspective here, the Biden administration could end a lot of this with a few phone calls, with added pressure onto the Israeli regime, and on putting pressure on Netanyahu to stop, putting pressure for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire so the killing can stop and humanitarian aid can get in. But I think we have to ask ourselves now, what type of if a ceasefire is to be proposed by the U.S. and supported, what type of ceasefire will it be? Will it be a temporary ceasefire that's going to maybe stop the bombing and the killing for a few weeks and then pick right back up? Maybe when Ramadan starts or when Ramadan ends. So that's important to keep in mind. And the details are very important, that yes, the public pressure is working. People are taking to the streets. The boycott movement is working. The voices are working. Past the censorship efforts, past the efforts to suppress our voices, we're still being heard. And this administration is moving a little bit at a time, but is it enough? Is it nearly enough for what we need now? And we do got to keep that in mind. We do got to understand the nuances of their language and of what they're saying. We have to continue with the pressure. As was mentioned earlier, in the U.S., there is a significant attempt to really silence critics of Israel and silence critics of Zionism at a level we have not seen before. We're seeing that in the workplace. We're seeing that in the classrooms. We're seeing that on college campuses. And we're seeing it also on social media. We're seeing it with platforms like Meta that are taking off and silencing Palestinian voices. We're seeing that on TikTok, where Palestinian users and Palestinian allies are being silenced. This is all coordinated, because this is the first time in history where you have a genocide that's unfolding in real time. You have a genocide that's being broadcast on people's cell phones. At any moment, you go through your timeline and you see video after video after video. So the Zionist regime, the Israeli regime, they're having a difficult time stopping this. They are applying pressure to tech companies. They're applying pressure to others that are in the space to silence our voices, to silence these people from speaking up. But again, we're breaking through on that, and we're going to keep pushing on that. But the next few days, next few weeks are very, very crucial. What we anticipate, this ties into the elections in the U.S. and with the Biden administration trying to salvage some support. We anticipate they will move a little bit on their position. They may even support a temporary ceasefire, but everything has to be in the details and what that means. And we also have to separate the politics and the elections from the actual crisis, humanitarian crisis that's happening and the genocide that's happening. Our support for a ceasefire is not based on electoral politics. It's based on humanity and on the fact that this is the right thing that you need to do. That's the position the administration needs to take. You don't take a ceasefire in strong language because now you believe you're going to lose a state like Michigan, which has a very large Arab Muslim Palestinian voting bloc, simply because, oh, now we're going to lose it. Now we need to change our rhetoric. The rhetoric needs to change and the position needs to change because it is the humanitarian thing to do. It's the right thing to do and it's what's needed. And we have to brace ourselves as a global community what the aftermath will be if there is a forced transfer out of Rafah into Egypt. This is unprecedented. This is something we have not seen, in our part of the world since the Nakba, and this is a major concern and something we need to be prepared for. And we do need to understand that the reality of this happening is high. It could happen, but we do need to keep the pressure. We need to organize and we need to be prepared about how we, how we respond, how we push this, and how we work together, not just in the U.S., but globally. That's why I appreciate your organization. We've watched it from afar for many years and follow your work. There is a lot we can do collectively on a global scale, and we're eager to keep that conversation going. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would just like to offer the floor and first thank everyone who has remained with us throughout this conversation for maybe 1 or 2 minute comments, especially if it is on Rafah. That would be great before we conclude the panel. Please feel free to unmute yourself. Or if we could start with Bill Law.
Yes,
you're on mute.
Yeah. Okay. Well, again, my thanks to everyone and to the contributions that have been made. I think that there are many challenges. The most immediate challenge is the threat of this IDF land attack on Rafah that needs to be confronted and challenged in various ways. I made my point about the leaders of Arab states taking a much stronger stand. I think that clearly in the UK here, we need to be taking a much stronger stand. I would like to see the leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer, take a much stronger stand. He started to move that way, albeit hesitantly. I think it's going to be very difficult to shift Biden for a variety of reasons. That's still no reason not to put the pressure on. I commend the efforts of my American colleagues to keep that pressure up. The time is really crucial right now, and everyone must push to prevent the threatened all-out assault of the IDF by ground troops on Rafah. This is a very dangerous time, as the other speakers have said. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to have some final remarks?
Thank you very much. I think is now a new attack to Rafah is coming before Ramadan or after Ramadan. This is the holy month of all Muslims, and I think this is very important for all of us. And before they start, we should do something. I don't know, because 1.5 million stuck there at the border. They have no food, no water, no sanitation, and other things. We need more pressure especially to West governments, United Kingdom and United States. I don't know what can we do more. Actually, we are doing our best to help the people, to aid, but to stop Israeli defense forces. I think we need to pressure on United States more and for sanctions before the new wave of attacks to Rafah starts. Otherwise, it will be very dangerous for the whole region and the whole world, and for the humanity as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Would it be possible to hear from David Miller? or Edward?
So, sure, again, thank you all for hosting us and for bringing us together across borders to discuss this. It really is an international problem and requires international pressure. The most important thing I think that we can do is to continue to raise our voice to make it very uncomfortable for our political leaders to continue doing what they're doing. And it can be somewhat depressing that we still don't have a ceasefire. But again, before actions change, rhetoric changes. We can see the rhetoric starting to change. Even in the United Kingdom, I think your Labour Party leader is now finally coming around in some way supporting the specific language of a ceasefire, kicking and screaming. And even in our government, again, you're slowly kind of getting there. And so the pressure has to be kept on through protesting, lawsuits, direct lobbying, media interviews, and of course, spreading the word of what's happening. These videos of horror being conducted in Gaza really made a huge difference. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it was very difficult to break through the bias of the mainstream media. You wouldn't easily see the carnage happening. Now, thanks to social media, a new generation, we can directly see the crimes that are being committed against Palestinians. So sharing that information on social media with reporters, especially, is critical. And that's why the Israelis are killing journalists in Gaza and not letting Western journalists in because they don't want people to see what they're doing. So that's another important thing we have to do is continue to uplift the voice of Palestinians in Gaza who are documenting their own genocide, which has never been done in human history before. We have to make sure that we're amplifying their voices to raise the pressure.
Absolutely. It is so essential that we stay on message, that we keep the pressure up. And I would just really like to thank everybody for their time. It was really, really, really great listening to everyone's insights. Thank you so much for your solidarity and continued support. And yes, stay in touch. Hopefully we can keep the pressure up. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.